The Gonzaga Bulldogs have the projected #1 offense in the entire country heading into next season. Here's why they can absolutely hit that lofty expectation.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, folks, we're talking about Bart Torvik's updated 2024-25 projected rankings. We're going to talk about where Gonzaga comes in on those rankings, their offensive and defensive efficiency projections, look at some of the other teams on Gonzaga's schedule. We're also going to take a look at the WCC. Where are Washington State and Oregon State? Can they hit the projections that we have from Torvik? We're going to close out the show with an exciting update on Killian Tillie. Haven't heard from him in a couple of years, but he is with the Boston Celtics in Summer League. We'll talk about that, a new home for Malachi Smith as well to close out the show. But let's start with the updates. I don't reference Bart Torvik as often on this show. For those of you who are longtime listeners to the show, everyday listeners, first of all, thank you. Appreciate you. Definitely join that Discord channel if you have not done so yet. But I'm usually using KenPom's data and then in season the net rankings, because that is what is being used to determine seeding and various things like that. So while I don't think the net is very predictive, it's not designed to be predictive. It is valuable information to have when evaluating Gonzaga's schedule, strength of schedule, seeding in the NCAA tournament, things like that. KenPom is excellent. It's outstanding. It's been around for 25 years. Always love using KenPom's data to help predict what's going to happen for Gonzaga, look at the projections as well. But Bart Torvik is another site that has excellent projection rankings and things like that. And he came out with a new update. I think it was on July 6th that the update came out. Did a little bit of a refresh in how he does some of the data, how he collects some of it, does more per minute data, which is, I think, proving to be more valuable than just looking at, well, this guy averaged 3.1 points a game last year. It's like, sure, but if it was on 9 minutes a game versus 18 minutes a game, there's a really big difference. So he did a refresh, got some updated information, wanted to use that as an opportunity to talk about where he had Gonzaga. The Gonzaga Bulldogs, according to Bart Torvik's projections for the 24-25 college basketball season, are in 9th, just inside the top 10. Here is a look at the top 10. Houston at #1, Duke comes in at #2, Iowa State at #3, Kansas at 4. That means that 3 of the top 4 teams are in the Big 12 conference. Tennessee at #5. That one kind of stood out to me, a little bit surprising for a team that loses Santiago Vescovi. They lose Dalton Connect. They lose Jonas Adu and Toby Awaka in the front court. A little higher than I might have thought they would be, but they're still going to be a very good team next year. They're at 5. North Carolina comes in at #6. Auburn out of the SEC comes in at #7. Alabama, that means 3 SEC teams in the top 8. Gonzaga, of course, comes in at #9. And then rounding it out, Arizona, Tommy Lloyd's Wildcats at #10. So you end up with 4 schools from the Big 12 in the top 10, 3 from the SEC, 2 from the ACC in North Carolina and Duke. And then the lone non-power conference program, the Gonzaga Bulldogs, of course, coming in at #9. I think 9 feels like a reasonable spot. It's a little bit lower than I think I'm going to have them. I have not finalized my top 25. I did a way too early top 25, a couple months ago now. It needs to be updated with a lot of high-profile transfer portal decisions and NBA draft decisions that have impacted those rankings. But I think I'll probably have Gonzaga in the 6, 7, maybe 8 range. So I'm not gonna quibble with 9. 9 feels pretty good. I think you can make an argument that Gonzaga should be a preseason top 5 team. I think that is an entirely reasonable argument. And I'm not going to be in any way, shape, or form upset if Gonzaga is 3rd, 4th, 5th in those rankings. But I think that the reasonable place to have them is probably that 6, 7, 8 range. 9, again, maybe a tiny bit low, but we're not going to quibble over 1 or 2 spot differences here. I think Torvik's data, KenPom's data, when he does the refresh ahead of the season, I think we're going to see Gonzaga pretty consistently coming in that 5 to 10 range on those preseason rankings. And I think the people rankings, when those start coming out, are probably going to have Gonzaga in a fairly similar spot as well. What I did want to focus on is the fact that Torvik, like KenPom, also does adjusted offensive efficiency and adjusted defensive efficiency. And the projections have Gonzaga currently projected as the number one offense in college basketball next season. Number one. The rest of the top 10 behind Gonzaga is Kansas at 2, Duke at 3, Alabama, Houston, Ole Miss, Baylor, Auburn, Miami, and North Carolina. So mostly teams that are still also in the top 10. The notable changes would, of course, be Ole Miss coming into the top 10, I think they're 5th or 6th in this ranking. Regardless, that is a surprise. Chris Beard is a fantastic coach, of course, but this team did well last year in the non-conference, just okay in the SEC, but to see them as a potential top 5, top 10 offensive team, that's certainly something to keep an eye on. Miami as well, they come in at number 9. They were a disaster last year, a lot of injuries, but this team also lost a ton of talent. Wooga Poplar transferred out. Keyshawn George goes to the NBA. Norchad Omier transfers. Like, this is a team that is going to look a lot different next year, but they have a really high-profile freshman coming in, Jaleel Bethia. They have some key returners, Matthew Cleveland, Nigel Pack are back in the mix, so it'll be interesting to see if Miami can get back to being one of the best offensive teams in the country. As for Gonzaga, yeah, they should be in this conversation. They should be, if not the projected number one team, no worse than top 5. This team returns so much of their talent. About 82% of their minutes are coming back. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show, but tons of minutes coming back from a highly efficient offense last year. You have an All-American caliber point guard in Ryan Nembhard, an All-American caliber big man in Graham Ike. You add some offensive firepower in Caleb Battle, some offensive firepower in Michael Ajayi. You have a deeper bench this year than you had last year. You get Steele Venters back in the mix, which he is factored into the data here that Bart Torvik uses. So I think Gonzaga, considering the talent that they have and considering the style that they play at, getting out in transition, fast-paced offense, lots of outside shooting, factoring in the talent they have on the roster, the returners, the way that the newcomers fit into this roster, and the style that Mark Few likes to play, yeah, absolutely give me Gonzaga at the top. I think Kansas and Alabama and Duke, to an extent, are totally logical to be in this conversation as well. Bama brings back Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, tons of other talent in that program. Nate Oates' teams have long been some of the best ones in the country offensively. Kansas brings back Hunter Dickinson and DeJuan Harris. They add A.J. Storr, who's a prolific scorer coming over from Wisconsin. So I think those are probably the right teams to be in this conversation. Baylor certainly should be in the conversation as well as they are. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this Gonzaga team is genuinely the number one offensive team in the country next season. Now, Torvik has Gonzaga's defense all the way down at 43, which, let's be clear, 43 is not terrible, but it's not good enough. No team has won a national championship in the KenPom era. So this is KenPom data, not Torvik data. That's an important distinction, that with a defense worse than 22nd. If you want to win a national championship, you have to have a top 25 defense in the country. If Gonzaga finishes next season 43rd in adjusted defensive efficiency, again, this is using KenPom's data, but they are similar, they would not be a national champion, almost certainly. They would be an extreme outlier, let's put it that way. However, I'm not sure I buy 43rd. Some of the data they're just using stats and rate data, and for somebody like Michael Ajayi, replacing Anton Watson is going to look like a net negative, and it is a negative. Anton Watson's an elite defensive player, but I don't think Ajayi is getting credit. Like, analytical models like this are going to struggle to kind of conceptualize Ajayi defensively because he's playing in a super different system at Gonzaga than he was at Pepperdine last year. So I think he's probably a better defensive player than some of this data is going to give him credit for. I think the same could be true of Caleb Battle as well. I'm curious. I think Dusty Stromer is going to take a big leap defensively, but ultimately for Gonzaga, the post defense needs to be better. Graham Ike or Braden Huff, or both ideally, need to step up and be better low post defensive players than they were last year. That needs to happen. Or Ismaila Diane plays a bunch of minutes, which I do not project to happen just because he's so young, and I don't think he's going to cut into the playing time of Ike and Huff and Ben Gregg in the front court. But they need one of those guys. We can throw Gregg in the mix. One of those three guys, ideally two of those three guys, to take leaps and bounds defensively for this team to be good enough to win a national championship. There's just no other way to spin that data. That needs to happen for Gonzaga to be in the conversation as a true national champion this year. Quickly, before we move on and talk WCC, I want to look at how these rankings projected the other opponents for Gonzaga this upcoming season. UConn notably was not in the top 10. That's a bit surprising. They come in at number 12, however, so not far off. They're the 7th ranked defense, projected defense, I should say, 35th offensively. For Gonzaga's other opponents, 2 more are in the top 25. Kentucky, Mark Pope's new look squad comes in at 23, very balanced, 25th in offensive efficiency, 26th in projected defensive efficiency. UCLA, Mick Cronin's team, comes in at 24, 30th on offense. This team was very bad offensively last year, so if they can jump all the way to top 30, that's a huge development for the Bruins. They come in at 24th defensively. Outside of that, San Diego State, a bit of a shocker. They're all the way down at 76. Now, this team lost a ton of talent from last year. Micah Parrish is gone. Elijah Saunders is gone. Lamont Butler is gone. They did bring in some nice transfers. They got some younger guys stepping into bigger roles, but this is a team that right now is a little bit hard to project as being nearly as good as they've been in the past. 149th projected offense, but the 14th projected defense. That's what Brian Dutcher and those Aztecs love to do. Nicholls State, the other confirmed opponent for Gonzaga this season, they are 202nd, 184th in offensive efficiency, 235th in projected defensive efficiency. And then quickly, the teams that are in the battle for Atlantis this year that Gonzaga could conceivably face, just in order of how they are ranked. Arizona, like we said, comes in at number 10. Indiana is 31st. Providence, Louisville, and Oklahoma are all very close to each other. The Friars are 60th. Louisville 2 spots later at 62, and Oklahoma comes in at 67. West Virginia follows at 83, and rounding it out is Davidson, coming in at 157. When we talk non-con, let's talk about the conference schedule. How does Torvik's updated projections look for the WCC? Are Washington State and Oregon State going to finish as top 5 teams in their first year in the conference? We got more on that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, Gametime. Folks, we are in the thick of minor league baseball season, and as somebody who lives about 10 minutes away from the Hillsboro Hop Stadium, I love being able to make a last-minute decision to grab my hat and sunglasses, go head out to the ballpark, grab a beer and a hot dog, and watch some minor league baseball. And that's why I use Gametime, because prices on the Gametime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, a views from your seat feature, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned that you're going to buy tickets from a third-party source that are not going to be legit, you're going to get turned away at the door. One of the nice things is Gametime's ticketing coverage makes your purchase covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. Personally, I love having that peace of mind. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. You can get 2 tickets to a Hillsboro Hops game for $25. Now that's $5 by using Gametime and redeeming it with code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about the updated 2024-25 projections using Bart Torvik's fantastic website, projecting all 362 Division I college basketball programs heading into next season. We talked about Gonzaga's projections at number 9 with the number 1 ranked offense in the country. We talked about the rest of Gonzaga's non-conference schedule, including 3 projected top 25 teams in UConn, Kentucky, and UCLA. Now what I want to do is talk about what Torvik has projected for the West Coast Conference. First of all, I'm just going to go through the rankings. Here is how Bart Torvik has projected the WCC standings to shake out this upcoming season, with Washington State and Oregon State joining the conference for the very first time. Gonzaga, of course, is at number 1 and number 9 overall. No shock, St. Mary's, despite a significant roster turnover, the loss of key people like Joshua Jefferson and Aiden Mahaney, St. Mary's still comes in at number 2 in the WCC. They are 38th overall, so not quite in that top 25 conversation, but 38th is still a very healthy place for Randy Bennett and the Gales to be. Number 3, this is where we see our first newcomer, Washington State, a brand new roster, one of the most difficult rosters for a computer system like Torvik to project, because there's no continuity, no returnees to that roster, very few returnees to that roster, I should say. So Washington State comes in at number 75 overall in Torvik's rankings, which is good enough for third place in the WCC. Number 4 is the Dons of San Francisco, a team that obviously lost some tremendous talent in Jonathan Mobo, who gets drafted in the NBA, as well as Mike Sheriff-Jomps, who moves on, handful of other pieces gone. They come in at number 84, just ahead of Santa Clara, who's number 5 at 98, just inside the top 100. They return Adama Alpha Ball. Carlos Stewart transfers back to Santa Clara after spending a year at LSU. Those two guys are going to be a menace of a guard room for Coach Herb Sendak. Number 6, this is where you get Oregon State. So they're both not quite in the top 5, but Oregon State comes in at number 6, 117th overall, another roster that underwent a significant overhaul this past offseason. They did return more talent than Washington State, but still a lot of pieces out the door, a lot of newcomers for Wayne Tinkle's team. Number 7, LMU at 158. Number 8, Pepperdine at 229. Number 9, San Diego at 257. Number 10, the Pilots of Portland, who lost a ton of talent from last year's roster. They're down at 286. Yikes for the Pilots. And then at number 11, rounding us out in the cellar, the Pacific Tigers at 318. We'll see how they can do under new coach Dave Smart there. Want to take a look at the projections for offense and defensive efficiency as well. They're not dramatically different, but it does give you a bit of a sense of kind of how these programs are projected. Gonzaga, of course, number 1 in offensive efficiency. St. Mary's, despite not being known for their offense, is still second in the WCC at 67, followed by Wazoo at 81, Santa Clara at 90, San Francisco at 97, Oregon State still in 6th place here at 111, LMU behind them at 120, Pepperdine at 232, huge gap there. Portland barely inside the top 250 offensively at 249, Pacific at 253, and the worst projected offense in the WCC belongs to Steve Lavin and the Toreros of San Diego at a woeful 272. Defensively, obviously, some of the teams that move down there are going to move up here on defensively, including St. Mary's, who is the top defense projected in the WCC and a top 20 defense overall. They come in at number 19. Gonzaga is second at 43. San Francisco is third at 65. Washington State is at 4th at 77. Santa Clara at 111. Oregon State at 134. Pepperdine at 207. San Diego gets a bit of a bump here. They're up to 224. LMU right behind them at 231. And then two of the worst projected defenses in the entire country. Shantae Leggins and the Portland Pilots come in at number 10, 331st in the nation among the 30 worst defensive teams projected by Bart Torvik. And then Pacific, woo boy, 359th, one of the 5 worst projected defenses in the entire country, belongs to the team in Stockton, California, the Pacific Tigers. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. Of course, obviously, Washington State and Oregon State is kind of the big storyline here. Wazoo, generally for offense, defense, overall projected to be 3rd or 4th in the WCC. Oregon State right smack dab in the middle in that 6, 7, 8 range for them heading into their first season of conference play. I do think Washington State's going to end up being a top 5 team. I'm not super confident they'll be 3rd necessarily, a team made up primarily of players from Eastern Washington and some other quality transfers. We've seen this succeed in the WCC. It's pretty much exactly what Shantae Leggins did at Portland. He came from Eastern Washington, took the job at UP, brought a handful of talented players with him, including Tyler Robertson, and they were pretty good for a year or two, and then things have kind of fallen off a little bit for the Pilots in the last couple of years. We'll see if David Riley can do more at Washington State. Obviously, it's a bigger school. There is more donors. There's more alumni base. There is likely more NIL money coming into that program. So I think the ability to succeed and stay sustainably successful in men's basketball is higher at Wazoo than it would be at the University of Portland. But it still is not a foolproof, hey, just bring players over from your old school and you'll have plenty of success. It didn't lead to a top 5 finish for Portland. I'm curious if it will for Washington State. The other key metrics here, and this is data from Evan Miyakawa's website, is that A key number in terms of having a successful season is returning 50% or more of your minutes from the previous season. For the WCC, there are only 4 programs that qualify for that. One of them is Gonzaga, who's all the way up at 81.5. That is 5th, by the way, in the entire country. The only high major program ahead of Gonzaga, interestingly enough, is Notre Dame, who is, I think, at 4th, and then Gonzaga comes in at 5th. Santa Clara is next in the WCC. They have about 76% of their minutes coming back. San Francisco and San Diego are both just over that 50% mark. It's USF at 54.7, San Diego at 53.5. Under 50% is everybody else. Notably, Washington State is at 4.5%. Again, you can't really fault Wazoo. They left the conference. They also lost their coach. Not surprising that most of those players left, but 4.5%. Oregon State, who also jumped down to the WCC from the Pac-12, they retain much higher at 25.7%. St. Mary's is just below that 50% mark at 47% as well. And the only school below 10% outside of Washington State is Pacific. They come in at 5.4%. That's probably not that bad of a thing for Pacific, considering how bad they were last season. Want to end this segment talking about the future additions, Grand Canyon and Seattle U. Of course, this will change after this upcoming season, but if you were wondering what those 2 teams would look like from a projection standpoint if they were in the WCC this year, Grand Canyon is 49th in Bart Torvik's projected rankings. That would be 3rd in the WCC behind Gonzaga and St. Mary's. They are 47th at offense, which would be 2nd, only behind Gonzaga. They are 57th in defensive efficiency, which would be 3rd behind St. Mary's and Gonzaga. So if you're thinking Grand Canyon's not going to be able to compete to be a top 3, top 5 team in the WCC, the projections certainly love them, at least this iteration of their roster, quite a bit. And Seattle U comes in better than I think a lot of people would expect them to. They're 136th in Torvik's rankings. That would be 7th in the WCC. So it's not like they're a huge moneymaker, but 7th in the WCC. Offensively, they're projected 204th, which would be 8th in the conference. Defensively, much higher. They're projected 85th heading into next season. That would be 5th in the WCC. Switching gears to close out the show, we're going to talk Killian Tillie. He's back, joining Anton Watson and the defending champion Boston Celtics in the Summer League. We got more on that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking Summer League basketball for the NBA. We got 2 updates for y'all. The first, Killian Tillie is back. For the first time since 2022, when he was waived by the Memphis Grizzlies, Killian Tillie is getting a shot to return to the National Basketball Association. He has signed with the Boston Celtics for their Summer League. He will play alongside Anton Watson, who was, of course, the 54th overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft and is heading to Boston to play for the Celtics. Fantastic, fantastic news for Killian Tillie. He has been in Spokane, also in France, kind of pinballing between the two as he rehabs from his injury. He's been doing a lot of work at the Shoot 360 facility in Spokane, owned by Dan Dickow. We've seen a lot of highlights of him working out. He's also been at a lot of Gonzaga basketball games, has helped them recruit in many instances. Spoke with when Nolan Traore was on campus. Obviously, that did not work, but he spoke with him. He spoke with other prospects that Gonzaga has brought to campus as well to potentially try to bring onto campus in a full-time capacity. So we've seen Tillie kind of be around the program. We've seen him rehabbing his injuries, working out. Now he finally gets another opportunity to make it back to the NBA. He played 54 total games in the NBA, all with the Memphis Grizzlies. He played 18 games as a rookie in the 2020-21 season, played about 10 minutes a night, averaged 3.2 points, 1.3 boards, shot about 30% from beyond the arc. In his second season in the NBA, in the 21-22 campaign, Tillie played 36 games, about 13 minutes a night, averaged very similar numbers, 3.3 points, 1.7 boards, a little better from the three-point line, about 31.5% there. He also played three games in the G League with the Memphis Hustle, averaged 11 points and 3.5 boards with them. Like I said, he's been rehabbing injuries. He's been working hard to try to get back to the point where he can get back onto a floor. Now he's going to get an opportunity with the Boston Celtics in Summer League. Again, if you're in Summer League, but you're not signed to an actual Exhibit 10 contract or a two-way contract, everybody's evaluating you. Boston's evaluating Killian Tillie, but so is every team they play. Everybody's going to be looking out for as many players as they can. Who do we want to potentially sign to bring into training camp? Who do we want to sign to an actual deal and get them some guaranteed money with some assurances that we're going to be able to keep their rights, things like that. So Killian Tillie working out with the Boston Celtics and playing for them in Summer League is great. and it may lead to him getting an opportunity to play with Boston. Certainly they'll see him more than any other team will, but ultimately this is about just him getting out on the floor and putting some tape together for any team, whether it's an NBA team, whether it's a G League team, whether it's an international team overseas who might look at him and say, hey, if nobody signs you over there, we'd love to bring you out here to get an opportunity to play. So this is about putting film on tape, looking healthy. Obviously, for Tillie, the skill set is the 6'10" guy who can shoot threes. He's got to be able to display that. If he can move fluidly, be an off-ball shooter, catch and shoot, do that kind of stuff, he has a real chance of making it. I talked about this with Drew Timme on Monday's show. It's really hard to make the NBA in Summer League when you're not already on a two-way or at least an Exhibit 10 contract. It is a tough, tough road. But Killian Tillie has been in the NBA before. He's played 54 NBA games. That is a huge advantage that he has over a lot of players in Summer League, including over Drew Timme, who has not played in the NBA at this point. So very excited to see if Killian Tillie can do enough, can get enough playing time and do enough with that playing time to put together some tape that makes him a potential somebody who potentially gets signed to an NBA contract or at least a two-way contract heading into this upcoming season. Malachi Smith has also signed with a team heading into Summer League. He will be with the Memphis Grizzlies, Killian Tillie's former team, currently Brandon Clark's team in the NBA. Smith spent time last year with two different G League teams, the Rip City Remix for the Portland Trailblazers, as well as the Wisconsin Herd for the Milwaukee Bucks. He was teammates with Drew Timme in Wisconsin. He played 14 games with Rip City, played about 30 minutes a night, put up huge numbers for the Remix, about 15.5 points a game, 6.6 boards, 3 assists, shot 46% on twos. Only 33% from three, which is down a bit from what he was, about 50% three-point shooter for Gonzaga in the regular or in the conference season from distance. And then for Wisconsin, Smith played 27 games with the Herd, about 25 minutes per game, averaged 9.5 points, 4.5 boards, 3 assists, shot 42% from three. That's more like it with Malachi Smith. I'm not sure I see an NBA career for Malachi Smith. He's an undersized off-ball guard. He doesn't play traditional point guard. He's bigger than some of the smaller two guards. He's bigger than like a Nolan Hickman, for example, but he still would be undersized to play the two in the NBA. But he put together some very good tape in the G League last year. Now he gets an opportunity to play with the Memphis Grizzlies. If he balls out in Summer League, he could absolutely get an Exhibit 10 or a two-way contract, get an opportunity to potentially find himself at least making a debut in the NBA. Somebody that I'm very curious to continue watching and see if he can make it work in the National Basketball Association. That gives us 5 total Zags who will participate in the Summer League this year. Boston is the team to watch. They have 2 of those 5 in Anton Watson and Killian Tillie. You also have Malachi Smith, of course, with Memphis, as we mentioned. Drew Timme is now with the Toronto Raptors. He started with the Sacramento Kings. He is now with Toronto. Definitely check out Toronto because you'll get to see Drew Timme as well as Jonathan Mobo from San Francisco. And then last but not least, Julian Strawther with the Denver Nuggets. I'm curious how much Strawther will even play. He's somebody who's pretty locked into being with Denver next year, probably playing at least, if not fully in the rotation, at least like getting decent minutes for that Denver team. So I'm curious if they will let him ride out Summer League and play a bunch of minutes, or if he'll only play a couple of games and then they'll pull him out because they've seen all they need to see. We'll be back later this week. That's going to wrap it up for me today, but we're going to continue to keep you up to date on Summer League, on the Olympics, as we continue to get updates on scrimmages between Team USA and the select team. They'll eventually scrimmage with Canada here in a couple of days. Very excited to get some reports on how Kelly Olynyk and Andrew Nembhard and Jalen Suggs for the select team look in those scrimmages. So we'll keep you up to date on the Olympics, on Summer League, on recruiting as we continue to get updates in that regard. So stick with us here on Locked On Zags, available 5 days a week here, wherever you get podcasts, also available on YouTube as well. Thank you to all of you who have made this show your first listen or watch of the day. I appreciate every single one of you. And until Wednesday, as always, go Zags.